Welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up for the week of 17 July 2022, episode 225. We got C++, 8220, HeatDeath of the Universe, Microsoft, Okta, Candiru, Intel, and all the show wrap-ups on the Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Monitoring and maintaining compliance is a never-ending struggle with a high price of failure. Firemon helps customers meet complex and varying compliance requirements. Firemon has fully customizable reporting, analytics, assessments, and dashboards to meet the compliance needs of any organization. With Firemon, compliance reports take a tenth of the time, and real-time continuous compliance eliminates the anxiety and headaches of audit preparation. Improve security outcomes by improving security operations with Firemon. Visit securityweekly.com/Firemon to learn more.
Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cyber criminals are hiding in the conversation. Cyber criminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of the 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection by going and getting your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. All right, I'm Doug White from Roger Williams University, and this is the Security Weekly News wrap-up show, episode 225. On Application Security Weekly number 204, John and Mike had Larry Maccheroni from DevSecOps Transformation at Contrast Security. Larry was on the show to talk about 0 days and in particular how 0 days affect the development process and what the future management of these types of things really looks like. I mean, it's a big deal, right? I mean, we see 0 days all the time. There's always new ones coming out. So, what do you do if you're in the middle of something and, a new 0 day pops up that invalidates a library or who knows what? So a lot of discussion about where that goes in the future. I mean, we've always had that sort of vision that maybe they'll stop being 0 days, but I don't think so. In the second segment, the AppSec news. On Business Security Weekly numbers 269, Ben Jason and Matt had Mike Goldgoff, the Vice President for Data Network and App Security Product Marketing at Barracuda, on the show. Mike was going to talk about a report that Barracuda put out that was called The State of Industrial Security in 2022, which had a lot of information in it about network breaches, some of the current challenges in infrastructure protection, remote access, solutions strategies, decision makers using for security loopholes, and IIoT infrastructure. So there was a big, fat report. So definitely worth checking that out. In the second segment, leadership and communication news. On Enterprise Security Weekly 281, Adria, Katie, and Tyler had on Aubrey Turner, an executive advisor at Ping Identity. Aubrey was on to talk about basically what he called a passwordless journey roadmap that delved into leveraging different risk signals like user behavior and device characteristics to make, and basically this is back to how do you authenticate people? And I mean, that's a big question. And how do we better identify people? How do we keep things like that from happening? In the second segment, Sick Codes, who is a security researcher and consultant at Sick Codes, Automated Security Research, was on the show. Sick hacked all 4 John Deere telematics gateways and other John Deere tractor stuff. Now, I don't know much about farming and tractors, but this is a really cool segment. Sick went on and talked about all kinds of, I don't know if you call them sick codes or just sick. It's like meatloaf. Do you say meat, Mr. Loaf? I don't know. But anyway, Sick went on and was talking a lot about how these hacks were done, how Sick stayed in the system for a long time and persisted. There was examples. There's all kinds of cool stuff in this. They also talked, and the other sort of point of this segment was that agriculture is a critical infrastructure segment, and what would happen if that sector got shut down by either a nation state or hacking or just some 12-year-old kid in Guyana who decides to take it out. And my guess was that cannibalism in about 4 hours, because the minute people hear that the farm system shut down, it's just going to be like, okay, eat the neighbors. That's all that's left. In the third segment, the enterprise security news. On Security Weekly News, number 224, Rich Mogul, the Senior Vice President of Cloud Security at Firemon, was on as my guest to talk about, well, we just talked about all kinds of stuff related to cloud and monitoring cloud stuff and so forth. So it was a fun segment. Rich is a really cool person, and it was an interesting little bit to listen to. On Paul Security Weekly, number 748, first up was the amazing Leslie Carhart. Leslie is the Director of Incident Response from Dragos. Leslie is a person with a lot of cool hobbies, some of which would result in serious ass-kicking. But Leslie is also seriously into ass-kicking in ICS and IIoT. So I think that's two of the big sectors that a lot of us have started focusing on. There's some merging going on between the ICS world, which had always sort of existed in its own little, planet. They had their own cons, they had everything. And, you're starting to see some overlap between all that stuff. So it was a very interesting segment. It was fun. We talked about devices, how the IoT stuff's evolved. Leslie advocated for something she called a crispy outside, even if you have a GUI center in your OT, and I thought that was pretty fun. So check that one out if you missed it. In the second segment, it's cybersecurity news. My threat of this week is going to be back to the basics, physical threats. So a long time ago, I used to do all this disaster planning stuff, and I was sort of the person they called, and I would sit around and say, well, what would happen if a tsunami, if a 10-meter tsunami hit the front of the building kind of thing? What have you thought about with that? And the IT people would go, what? And then we would try to develop plans for what happens, if, Santorans invade, anything. And so this story that I attached to this was about how the heat wave, and if you haven't, you've been under a rock hiding from the sun, there's a massive heat wave in Europe right now with temperatures over 40 centigrade. And there's this heat wave in the UK, and it caused outages in the Google and Oracle clouds. And it really made me go back to the well, even if the well has run dry due to the heat wave. But we all know heat's bad, right? I don't think there's anybody in IT or security that hasn't been around servers and racks and even just personal computers and laptops. And we even had a story on Paul Security Weekly on Wednesday night, if you missed that, about a liquid-cooled laptop. In fact, we ended up talking about that quite a bit. And I did a lot of work overclocking motherboards back in the late 20th and early 21st centuries because, benchmarking is fun. People kept saying, what do you do with these machines? Like, I don't know, we just benchmark them. It's fun. See what you can get out of them. But, that created a lot of heat. And I think we've all learned that if our server rooms start to cook and the racks start to smell like a fry cook scrape trough, well, that's a bad sign. And probably pretty soon weird things are going to happen because heat does strange things to server racks. It doesn't do things that are obvious. The systems don't start flash. Well, they might. Flash warnings about temperature, but a lot of times things lock up. They may actually, flag a message that may not be the right message, but I've just seen all kinds of strange things with heat, and that's why we spend so much on HVAC, right? Well, then along comes the cloud, and the cloud told us that everything would be out of band, and we would never be hungry again, or something like that. And when everybody jumped on board that, and it was a big marketing feature, we all jumped on board the good ship pack of, I'm not going to say that, lies, and we thought it was all cool, and all the disaster paranoids could go back in their bunkers and shut the hell up. Well, we're back. So all of us disaster paranoids are back, and I want to tell you, heat is scary. And this isn't a political segment. We're not talking about that. We're talking about heat in the server room. Now, I worked in this massive dark server room for a while, like a blimp hanger size server room, and it was very hot. There was I don't even know how many thousands of servers were in there, and all the storage and everything, and all of it was generating heat. And there were tons and tons of HVAC sitting outside to try to keep it cool. And it was located in a place that lately has been having a lot of problems with their power grid. Now, we had a generator, with massive generators that would power this place if the power grid failed. But there's still issues with the power grid failing and our connectivity, right? So even if we are okay and we've got generators the size of the battleship Potemkin to power all the HVAC to keep the place cool, if the network goes down because all the power is down in between us and everywhere else, we've still got a problem. And, between crypto miners and window air conditioners and other horrible air conditioning units and the 40-degree heat, well, it's kind of a perfect storm of heat. and then throw your server rack in the middle of that in a giant warehouse sitting under the blazing sun in a place where it's 40 degrees, and you got a problem. Now, the cloud supposedly took care of that. They took that out-of-band resiliency that we always talked about. I mean, I don't even know how many times I said this to people. You need to get stuff out of band. You need to have servers that are not going to get hit by the tsunami because they're far enough inland that they won't be hit, the blizzard, the hurricane, whatever it is. And that was called out-of-band resiliency. And, so you had hot sites and warm sites and cold sites and all that kind of stuff that we used to pitch so that you could try to stay afloat even when Hurricane Katrina hit and the whole town was underwater. But you didn't listen. And you only set up a cold site in a Holiday Inn a block away from the beach, and so that got flooded too, and I danced around in the warm rain saying, see, told you kind of stuff. You want Mad Max? This is how you get Mad Max. But regardless, the whole point of this rant is not to attack cloud resilience, but rather to remind you that nothing is 100% resilient, no matter what the marketing materials say. And so you probably need to start thinking, and this is what this article made me think about, was not that the cloud is bad, not that, that I've been lied to, because I never believed it in the first place, but you probably need to start testing your switchovers and your survivability for what if the cloud goes down? Like, what happens? Now, I'm sure that Oracle and Google have a white paper encyclopedia that explains how this can't possibly happen, but it kind of did. And that makes me think that all of us probably need to revisit some of those old paranoia docs that I wrote back a long time ago about what's going to happen when it all comes crashing down. I mean, you really need to assess your resilience and your time horizons. I mean, how long can your business be down? And what does this actual switchover look like if, say, Google or AWS or Azure or whatever you're using goes down? And maybe they don't go down. Maybe Azure is up and running and perfectly happy with their resilient infrastructure, which they have. But what if the connections between there and you are down and you can no longer access this data exchange? What happens? And I don't know your particular situation, but I think this heat thing, you really need to look at it. Because what if there's rolling blackouts in your area and you go, we got a generator. Yeah, but does your generator also power all of the connectivity between you and the cloud? So your giant blimp hangar with servers in it is running on your giant Battleship Potemkin generator. But what if the wiring to the routers to the backbone is down because of brownouts or sunspots? Or what if legally you can't do that? What if the law says, and there's not a law that I know of that says this, but what if the law says you have to shut down because of the power grid? And they say you can't run your generator because of, it runs on coal or whatever. And just, or maybe it's just some, a good old-fashioned Lunamoth in the memory array. But, I mean, this article really made me think a lot. I mean, I read this. I was thinking about it. I sat around and thought about it. I sat around and thought about it some more. And this is really a time when I think you need to start reviving and this is not just because I'm looking for a new consulting job, but you really need to start reviving your SLAs with your cloud providers. Because what do we know about this? And the cloud providers say, we're up, but you can't get to us. Well, that's another part of this problem. It may not be as big, your resilience may not be as strong as you've been thinking, really. And now the news. Crypto mining gang 8220. And I looked trying to figure out what the number 8220 means, and I found all kinds of weird stuff, but I still don't know where it came from. Crypto mining, of course, I didn't Google what is crypto mining gang 82. I just Googled the number 8220. I thought about it's not a prime number. It's not a Fibonacci number. I was trying to figure out where the number came from, but I don't know. But the crypto mining gang 8220 is described as a low-skilled, financially motivated actor by the article. I was like, wow. But it says they target AWS, Azure, GCP, Alaton, and QCloud by first targeting Docker, Redis, Confluence, and Apache. So they're not, I wouldn't call that low-skilled, but apparently the gang has typically used publicly available exploits to compromise Confluence servers in the past. So that would kind of make them script kiddies, but hey, whatever works. They gain their initial access, and then they use SSH brute force to spread and hijack resources. The objective is running crypto miners. So the group has been around since 2017, does not appear to use sophisticated techniques, but they are really, really operating well. I mean, and do you need to design a death ray satellite to rob people in an ATM? So Sentinel Labs did this paper. They observed and analyzed the latest campaign they're running and found that they have actually gotten more sophisticated. They've added things to their script in order to expand their botnet, and that they have some very large botnets now. This botnet is stealthy, apparently, despite not having dedicated evasion mechanisms because of the way it runs in the system. Last month, their script started using 450 hard-coded credentials, which were Linux-oriented. It didn't say what those were, but I was guessing like Tor or Gandalf, the usual stuff. But another update they put out excluded specific hosts from infection, which, according to the analysis, said it seems to be an attempt to avoid honeypots. So they were trying to detect when they were trying to be detected. The script now runs Pwnrig, or Pwnrig. I always say Pwnrig, which is based on the open-source miner XMRig. The latest version has a fake FBI subdomain with an IP address that points to a Brazilian federal government domain, but that's all fake. It creates a fake pool, and that somehow obscures the real destination of the crypto. They didn't really explain exactly how that worked, and I was trying to think about what that meant, and I'm not sure. I'm sure some of you know what that means and probably will post it in the Discord or on YouTube or whatever, but I wasn't exactly sure how that worked in terms of these crypto pools. So anyway, but definitely worth keeping an eye on those guys. Windows 11 is now blocking RDP brute force attempts by default. Wow. They're using an account lockout policy, which will lock the account, and this includes admin accounts, after 10 failed sign-in attempts. The block stays in place for 10 minutes. Now, the security part of me is like, why didn't they do this like 40 years ago? I mean, this seems very obvious because RDP is a huge source of threat, surface type stuff. And it seems to be a great idea. But the reason I put this story in, and a lot of times the reason I put these stories in is not because I think that you need somebody to tell you about it as much as I want to remind you that this may affect your organization. If you're using Win 11 in your organization, I use this measurement tool called My Dad for these things. And for some reason, my father had this tech block. And he was a really smart guy. He was a really hardworking guy. He was an accountant. He was a division head at a major corporation, that sort of thing. But tech just, I don't know, fried him. He did manage the Key Punch group back in the 60s, but modern stuff, it just, I don't know. But this would probably be about a 7 out of 10 on the My Dad meter. Because if it said you have 6 tries remaining, that was just sort of a panic button. And don't get me wrong, I'm 100% in favor of this. I think it should have been able long ago, but it may generate a bunch of help desk calls because if your CEO gets locked out for 10 minutes, you know how that goes. So keep it in mind. On that same note, and this is also a great thing to do, Microsoft re-added their blocking of Office VBA macros by default. Now, they had put this in place, and then they rolled it back mysteriously. I did the story, and I was talking, they didn't say why. They just were like, all of a sudden, no, we're going to take this back. And you can always enable it, right? I mean, both these things could be enabled by you all along. It's just about them being in place by default. But last month, they mysteriously rolled it back, and now they're rolling it out again. So the quote from Microsoft was, based on our review of customer feedback, we've made updates to both our end user and our admin documentation to make clearer what options you have for different scenarios. And I guess what that means is that no one knew what to do when they did this in the first place. So they just rolled it out. They didn't really tell anybody. And all of a sudden, a bunch of stuff quit working and everybody freaked out and they didn't have any documentation on how to fix it. They did apparently add docs for situations that would need macros like SharePoint and network file shares and all this kind of stuff. They went on to say that they rolled it back due to negative feedback earlier this year. It would have been nice to tell everybody that in the first place and maybe even before they rolled it out the first time. But, that's how that stuff works, and we all know that. We talked about this story on PSW this week, and Paul is very interested in this sort of thing now. The Intel Microcode Decrypter was published on GitHub on Monday of this week, and it is a collection of some Python scripts that you may execute, which will allow you to decode microcode, including the SGX XU code, which is found on some Atom, Pentium, and Celeron chips. This means you can literally look at the microcode instructions on those CPUs. So this is this sort of holy grail of deep dive stuff that exists. Being able to look at the assembly code in the processor is something that people have always wanted to do, have always been trying to do, and now you actually can on some processors. Now, this does not mean, and they make a big deal about this, that you can write updates or that attackers could start writing updates and pushing them out for these CPUs. Because it does require an RSA signature to manage the integrity of any update to firmware. But according to the article, Intel seems nonplussed about it. And that's the American definition, not the British definition. Because the American definition of nonplussed is like, meh. And the British definition is like, I'm confused. So there's that word, yeah. So if you're British or you're from Europe and you learn English from British people, this is the American definition of nonplussed. Intel said, meh. To me, I'm glad to see this. The ability to analyze microcode could allow researchers and 12-year-old kids in Borneo to find and learn all about this stuff and learn new vulnerabilities and find them. And what could Intel do about it anyway? I mean, if it's available, these researchers figured out a way to get it. It was not in cooperation with Intel. But it's exciting because you really couldn't do this before. I mean, there was ways to try to grab this stuff, but it was really challenging. And if you did grab it, you couldn't decode it. But, processor design code is one of those great hidden worlds that we rarely get to see. So if you're interested in this type of research or you want to start trying to pull microcode, there is a link on the GitHub site that will take you to an Offensive Con 22 presentation by the developers. It's really good if you're interested in this stuff. I sit down and watch it. It's a great presentation, so go check that out. Well, Okta has struggled. When you're a password and user management company and you get hacked like Okta did last January, well, people start asking questions. If your whole business model is about protecting passwords and you get hacked, and I know that they got hacked because of a third party and all this stuff, and they fixed all that, but still, people start questioning, and that's a big deal. So security researchers from Authamize claimed that Okta has serious security flaws which would allow someone to gain remote access to the platform, extract plain text passwords, impersonate users, and alter logs, and so forth. Now, Okta, in response to this, made a blog post that I thought was rather trite, that basically said, the issues discussed are features, not flaws. And I was like, okay, corporate speak much? What? Turn it around on them. They're features, not flaws. Now, I don't know. I don't have a lot of deep dive on this, and some of you may, or you may want to look into it. But according to Authamize, all that is needed to gain the plain text access to password is to gain application admin privileges on a system. Authamize went on to say that given the expanding application threat surface in most organizations, well, the likelihood is pretty high this is going to happen. Now, Okta says, and I guess this is part of the feature that they're talking about. Okta says that the passwords are in clear text because there's no standard reliable protocol for syncing hashes. Okay, well, that's true. And Authamize said then that Okta had pledged to have its product team take a closer look at the claims. So maybe they should have done that before they put the thing out calling these features. I don't know. I didn't like that when they said it's a feature, not a flaw. I'm like, really? It sounds like a flaw, but okay. Candiru's back. And if you don't know what a Candiru fish is and you value your urethra's mental health, I wouldn't look it up. But apparently, this seller of cyber attack software exploited a 0-day in Chrome, along with 2 other 0 days, to infect journalists and other targets with their sophisticated spyware. The flaw is a memory corruption flaw in web real-time communications, which is open source and has JavaScript programming interfaces that would allow web browsers and devices to interact. So this is something that's widely used in Chrome. The flaw itself was patched on the 4th of July this year by Google. Avast, who was reporting on this, reported multiple attack campaigns which used various methods to deliver the malware to Chrome users in Lebanon, Turkey, Yemen, and Palestine. They used watering hole sites that were very selective in choosing which visitors would be infected, and then they installed Devil's Tongue, which is what they've been doing all along. Devil's Tongue, that's the name Microsoft gave to the malware that Candiru sells, and Candiru is reputedly based in Israel. Devil's Tongue used an unpatched Windows vulnerability in a driver that it installs. So you have to get in somehow to install Devil's Tongue, but Devil's Tongue then pushes a driver onto Windows that is unpatched. Now, all of this was patched by Chrome and Edge previously, but Apple did not. They patched it back in July, but Apple did not, or the 4th, it's still July, I guess, but Apple didn't fix this until Wednesday in Safari. So if you have Apple users or you have iOS users that are using Safari, you may want to make sure that all those systems are up to date to avoid Candiru. And finally, at the C++ North event in Toronto this week, Chandler Carruth, a Google software engineer, presented a new programming language called Carbon. Carruth went on to call Carbon an experimental successor to C++. Now, as you might guess, saying something like that is a pretty bold statement, and it invoked fistfights and duels among the programmers present. Well, maybe not, but that's how I imagine it happening. Unlike the security community, where everybody we interview, they're like, oh yeah, I know advanced jujitsu, kung fu, and I'm a Shaolin master. I mean, it's like a security, community thing. Or they're heavily armed. They have all kinds of weapons and stuff. We interview people, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm a master of like multiple sword use, and and I make my own swords, and it's an interesting thing. But programmers, well, enough said. I won't bash myself anymore. But Carruth is a technical lead for Google core programming languages and language evolution, and represents Google on the C++ standards committee, and is a contributor to LLVM and Clang. Carbon developers said that C++ is the dominant language for performance-critical software, absolutely, but its legacy and technical debt means that incrementally improving C++ is difficult. And I don't disagree with that. I mean, that is a very challenging thing to do. I guess the idea is to create a similar language to C++ so you don't have to spend massive amounts of time retraining, but to fix some of the problems inherent in C involving memory and some of the tuple stuff and all that was trying to be fixed. There's a lot of details in the article. One of the things that he also said was somebody asked about Rust and why they weren't just using Rust, and he basically said, well, if Rust is the best solution to your problem, you should use Rust. So will this take off? Given the number of C projects that are ongoing, I don't know if it will succeed. But I mean, look, where's Fortran today? And that's the wrap up for the week of 17 July 2022. I'm Doug White. We'll see you next week on the Security Weekly News.